For most viewers, The Machinist is the film where Christian Bale dropped to a skeletal weight. That image is what made it famous, and that image is also what made everything else easy to miss. Behind it sits one of the strangest psychological thrillers of the early 2000s, a script no American financier wanted, a city in Spain pretending to be nowhere, a score borrowed from a 1950s sci-fi classic, and a hidden network of clues most viewers don't notice until they watch it twice. The weight loss was the headline. The film underneath it has been quietly building a reputation ever since. Number 1. Script no one wanted. By the time Scott Kosar finished his screenplay in the late 1990s, American genre cinema was in the middle of a thriller boom. Studios were still chasing the success of films like Seven and The Sixth Sense, and dark psychological material was, in theory, exactly what financiers were looking for. But Kosar's screenplay kept getting passed on. Producers read it, recognized something unusual in it, and then declined. The reason wasn't that it lacked craft. It was that the script refused almost every commercial instinct a thriller was supposed to have. There was no real love story, no breakout action sequence, no clean third-act release. The protagonist was a man slowly destroying himself in a factory, surrounded by people who might not exist, and the eventual answer was less a twist than a confession. American financing wanted something it could sell on a poster. The script offered a man too thin to cast a shadow. What finally moved the project into production was geography rather than instinct. Filmax, the Barcelona-based company run by Julian Fernandez and Julian Maezo's wider production network, took the screenplay on, and the production was rebuilt around a Spanish base with American leads. Kosar's script had spent years looking for a home, and the home that took it wasn't in America at all. Number 2. Barcelona became nowhere. On screen, Trevor Reznik lives in a vague, washed-out American town somewhere on the edge of an industrial district. In reality, almost every frame was shot in and around Barcelona. The factory, the diner, the airport scenes, the apartment blocks, the long underpass shots, the dirt roads at the edge of town. Catalan locations dressed and lit to pretend they were somewhere else. The disguise wasn't simple. Spanish road markings had to be repainted, signage had to be replaced or removed, vehicles had to be sourced or modified, and recognizable Barcelona architecture had to be avoided or filmed at angles that scrubbed its identity. Filmax brought in art direction that systematically pulled local references out of the image so the city could pass as a generic unnamed America. The result was something stranger than any single American city would have produced on its own. Trevor's world doesn't quite match any place a viewer can name. The streets feel right, then slightly wrong. The architecture is familiar, then slightly off. That mismatch is one of the reasons the film feels so dislocated. And it's a dislocation that exists not only inside Trevor's head, but inside the location itself. The production didn't just shoot in a stand-in city. It built a country that doesn't exist. Number 3. The typo Bale took seriously. 120 pounds. That was the target Christian Bale set for himself when he started reshaping his body for The Machinist, and it became one of the most discussed physical transformations in modern film. What's less discussed is where the number came from. The story, as the production has retold it over the years, is that Scott Kosar typed his own weight into the script while drafting it. Kosar was a slight man. Bale was 6 foot. The 120-pound figure that appeared in the screenplay was never engineered as a character target. It was a writer's body weight, accidentally written into a character description and never corrected. Once it was on the page, it became a number with authority. Bale read it, registered it as a fact about Trevor, and decided to reach it. That decision produced the skeletal frame the film is now famous for, and it also produced a transformation unlike how most dramatic weight loss is planned for a role. Most leading actors set targets in consultation with trainers, doctors, and producers. Bale's target came from a typo in a script written by someone he had never met, and he went after it as if it were a stage direction. The image that became the picture's calling card was not a designed marketing concept. It was a stranger's body weight, written into a thriller by mistake and accepted as gospel by an actor already willing to push further than the role required. The cultural memory of the film keeps coming back to the body. The more revealing detail is the chain of decisions behind it. A typo became a target. The target became a transformation. The transformation became the headline. Number 4. Ivan was built like a shadow. He arrives at the lathe in a leather jacket, broad-shouldered and confident, with a scar running along his face and a manner that doesn't quite match the rest of the shop floor. The other workers blur into routine around him. Ivan stands out, too clean, too composed, too physically defined for someone who is supposed to be just another machinist. That standout quality is engineered. Ivan is built visually like a hard mirror of Trevor. Full-bodied where Trevor is wasted, calm where Trevor is jittery, capable where Trevor is collapsing. The film does not yet ask the viewer to understand why this man feels wrong, only to register that he does. Most thriller misdirection works by hiding the truth in plain sight. Ivan is the opposite. He is so vivid he seems to demand explanation, and the explanation, for a long stretch of the picture, refuses to arrive. By the time the audience understands what Ivan is doing in the story, he has already been doing it the whole time. He has functioned as a shadow Trevor cannot acknowledge, a physical container for guilt that hasn't yet been named. The film treats him almost like a symptom rather than a character, something Trevor's mind has produced to carry weight Trevor cannot carry himself. Whether that reading is generous to John Sherion's performance or harsh on it depends on the viewer, and the film never settles the question. Number 5. Anderson directed in pain. The factory locations were hot, the floors slick with industrial fluid, and the safety margins thinner than the production wanted. Brad Anderson was directing a film already built around bodily collapse, and he was doing it while injured. The accounts that survive describe him moving through the shoot in real physical discomfort, working long days inside a production that, by design, looked unhealthy on camera and felt unhealthy off it. Anderson had come to The Machinist off a string of smaller indie features and was working with a leaner crew than American genre productions usually afford. The shoot was tight, the schedule was unforgiving, and the conditions inside the practical machine shop sets were rough on cast and crew alike. Bale was carrying his weight loss. Anderson was carrying injuries of his own. The picture's grimy texture wasn't only a design decision, it was something the people making it were experiencing in their bodies. What that produced, in the finished cut, is a kind of physical credibility that polished thrillers rarely have. The exhaustion on screen isn't performed exhaustion alone. It sits inside a production that was itself exhausted. The director made it through the shoot, the production made it through post, and the result carried into the final film a layer of physical reality the budget couldn't have bought directly. Number 6. The image was drained. Look at any frame of the film and notice what color isn't there. Skies are flat and gray. Skin is gray. Steel is gray. The factory walls have been bled out into a band of muted blues and pale silvers. The few warm colors that do appear, like Marie's lamp, the mother's apartment, a strip of neon, feel almost imported, as if they don't belong to the same world as the rest of the picture. That look was built deliberately. The film was shot on 35mm by Xavi Gimenez and then carried through a digital intermediate, which by 2003 was just becoming a standard tool for tightening palette control after photography. Anderson and Gimenez used that latitude to pull warmth and saturation out of nearly every interior and exterior, leaving a cold, metallic image that reads less like a stylized choice than like the world itself has run out of color. The grading isn't theatrical, it's clinical. The effect on the viewer is cumulative rather than immediate. The first few minutes don't announce themselves as visually unusual. By the time Trevor is 20 minutes into his disintegration, the eye has stopped expecting the picture to recover its color, and the absence of warmth becomes its own kind of pressure. The image is drained because Trevor is drained, and the design carries that draining outward into every surface he touches, into every space he walks through, and into every shot that follows him. Number 7. No time, no place, no escape. Watch the film carefully and try to date it. Trevor uses a fridge, a stove, a bathroom mirror, a coffee machine at the diner, a payphone. There are cars, but not memorable ones. There are televisions, but the broadcasts on them are vague. There are no laptops, no obvious mobile phones, no period music cues, no posters for movies that would anchor a year. The factory machinery could be from the 1970s or from yesterday. The whole world has been quietly emptied of the kind of detail viewers normally use to place a story in time. The same emptying applies to geography. The town has no name, the factory has no logo, license plates are obscured or generic. Almost every detail that a normal thriller would use to ground the audience in a where and a when has been carefully removed. The effect is that the picture floats. Viewers cannot fix it to a year or a city, and after a while they stop trying. That looseness pays off in the final third, where the question of what's real and what isn't becomes the engine of the story. By the time Trevor's reality starts to collapse, the audience has already been quietly trained to mistrust the world he moves through. The design didn't wait for the twist to begin disorienting people. It started doing that work in the first shot, and it never quite lets the viewer find solid ground. Number 8. The theremin changed everything. The first time it appears on the score, it sounds wrong. Not wrong as in poorly chosen. Wrong as in too old, too strange, too detached from anything a 2004 thriller is supposed to use. A theremin is one of the oldest electronic instruments in cinema, most closely associated with mid-century science fiction, and it shouldn't fit a film about a man in a machine shop. That mismatch is the point. Roque Baños' score leans on the theremin and the older orchestral textures it lived inside, and the most direct echo is Bernard Herrmann's The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951. Herrmann's score for that film used the theremin to signal something genuinely alien, a presence that did not belong to the human world. Baños reaches for the same instrument to do something similar inside Trevor's head. Trevor's insomnia, his guilt, and his unreliable perception are scored not as suspense, but as alien interference, as if the unease is being broadcast into him from somewhere outside. That choice makes the score feel haunted rather than tense. The film mostly avoids the obvious factory noise sound design that genre cinema reaches for in industrial settings. The theremin does the work instead, carrying the impression that something is off long before Trevor or the audience can name what. Whether most viewers consciously register the Herrmann reference is another question, and the homage doesn't depend on recognition to function. Number 9. Dostoevsky and the Machine. On the surface, The Machinist is a thriller. It has a mystery, a protagonist trying to solve it, a series of clues, and a final reveal. Look closer, and the architecture is less a thriller's than a guilt novel's. The closer parallel to what the film is actually doing sits in 19th century Russian literature, in the tradition of Dostoevsky and the writers who built stories around conscience rather than around plot. The Dostoevskian shape is recognizable once it's named: a man who cannot sleep, a man pursued by a figure who may be a stranger or may be a double, a man whose surroundings start to function as accusations rather than as places, a man moving inexorably toward confession, not because the law catches him, but because his own mind refuses to let him keep what he did buried. That arc is the spine of crime and punishment, and the spine of any number of Russian guilt narratives. And it is also almost beat for beat the spine of Trevor's story. The factory becomes Raskolnikov's St. Petersburg. The post-its become the inner voice. Ivan becomes the doubled self that exists primarily to drag the truth into the light. What that parallel does for the picture is shift the weight of the ending. If the film were only a thriller, the reveal would be the achievement, and everything before it would be a puzzle the audience was meant to solve. Reading the structure as guilt novel rather than as mystery reframes that reveal as confession. Trevor isn't being unmasked by an outside investigator, he is being unmasked by himself, slowly, through a process that the audience watches in real time. The film stops being about what happened and becomes about what cannot be kept hidden any longer. Whether Kosar or Anderson were consciously writing toward that tradition, or whether the parallels emerged organically from the material, is the kind of question the film doesn't answer directly. The shape is there either way, and once a viewer sees it, the picture stops looking like a thriller with a twist and starts looking like something older, slower, and more morally serious. Number 10. Reznik hid a music clue. Look at the protagonist's name, Trevor Reznik. Now look at the lead figure behind 9 Inch Nails, Trent Reznor. The proximity is not accidental. Scott Kosar drafted the screenplay during a period when industrial music was reshaping how American film thought about anxiety, dread, and mechanical noise. Pretty Hate Machine and The Downward Spiral had already mapped much of the emotional territory that The Machinist would later occupy on screen: a man inside a machine, unable to sleep, breaking apart from the inside out. Reznor's records had made factory sounds, breakdowns, and self-erasure into a recognizable vocabulary that American cinema hadn't yet caught up to. Embedding a faint echo of his name inside the protagonist's identity gives the picture a quiet fingerprint, a signature pointing back toward the music culture that had been doing similar work in a different medium for the better part of a decade. Most viewers don't notice it on a first watch. Once it's pointed out, it's hard to unsee, and it makes the film feel deliberately stitched into a moment in alternative music history that its industrial setting otherwise only hints at. Number 11. The factory became a trap. Iron presses, lathes, sparks, oil-streaked floors, and the steady low pressure of machinery that never quite stops. The factory in the film functions less as Trevor's workplace and more as a slow, mechanical antagonist. The space presses in on him before any specific incident occurs. The rhythm of the shop floor is its own kind of accusation. The routine that everyone else has adjusted to is the routine he can no longer pretend to be part of. When the accident with Miller's hand finally happens, the film has already spent most of an hour preparing the audience for it. The factory has been shown as crowded, dangerous, and slightly unforgiving, populated by men who watch Trevor sideways and find reasons to be wary of him. Anderson and his crew kept the machine shop scenes grounded in real industrial detail, which gives the violence, when it comes, a weight that more stylized thrillers struggle to earn. The accident isn't a horror beat. It's the next step in a logic the location has been pushing toward. That logic is what turns the factory from a setting into a trap. Trevor cannot quit it because he needs the work, he needs the routine, and on some level, he needs the punishment of being there. The film uses the factory as the place where guilt starts to take physical form. Once the mental and the physical begin trading places inside the story, the workplace stops being a backdrop and becomes the engine. The exit is not through the gate. The exit is through the truth. Number 12. Ironside was a red herring. On screen, the man at the lathe across from Trevor looks like Trouble from his first appearance. He is played by Michael Ironside, who had spent 2 decades building a screen identity around hard, dangerous men in films like Total Recall, Starship Troopers, and Scanners. Viewers walked into The Machinist with that history already loaded. Miller, the factory worker who loses a hand on the lathe Trevor is operating, was always going to read as suspicious before he had said a word. That was useful. The film needs the audience to suspect almost everyone Trevor interacts with at the factory, because the actual source of the mystery is Trevor himself, and the longer the picture can keep that source hidden, the better the eventual reveal lands. Ironside's casting is a piece of misdirection built into the production before a single scene was shot. The viewer's instinct to track him as a possible threat keeps attention away from the man holding the camera's point of view. The casting works on a second level as well. Ironside is also a credible factory presence. He looks like he has held a tool, taken an order, and resented a coworker. The misdirection only works because the realism underneath it works. Viewers are tracking Miller as a possible threat and simultaneously believing in him as a machinist, which is exactly the double duty the role needed. By the time the film clarifies who is actually responsible for what, Miller has done his structural job, and the threat the audience was tracking turns out to have been a deliberate decoy from the casting decision onward. Number 13. Stevie and Marie split lifelines. In the small apartment where Stevie lives, the light is soft, the bed is unmade, and the talk between her and Trevor is easy in a way nothing else in his life is easy. In the diner where Marie works the late shift, the chrome is cold, the coffee is bottomless, and the conversations stay polite, careful, almost weightless. The film draws Trevor toward both women, and it uses each one to anchor a different half of who he is. Stevie belongs to the damaged real world Trevor cannot leave. She works in a profession the picture treats with unusual matter-of-factness. No judgment, no salvation arc, no script-engineered redemption. And her relationship with Trevor is honest about what each of them is offering the other. Stevie sees him. She notices the weight loss before he wants to be noticed, and she stays with him longer than the script asks her to. Jennifer Jason Leigh plays her as a woman who has been tired before and recognizes the kind of tiredness Trevor is bringing into her life. The stretch of the film that lives with Stevie is where Trevor's loneliness is visible without being explained. Marie is the other axis. She is the imagined possibility of a normal evening, a normal coffee, a normal son's birthday. Aitana Sanchez-Gijon plays her with the warmth Stevie deliberately doesn't have. Marie is not damaged. Marie is not waiting. Marie is what Trevor's mind reaches for when it cannot bear what Stevie represents. The picture spends a long stretch, letting the audience invest in Marie, before quietly revealing how much of her Trevor has built rather than met. Reducing either woman to a function would be unfair to both performances. Stevie isn't only the real life Trevor returns to. Marie isn't only the comfort he invents. Each of them carries a version of warmth the film cannot bring itself to give him. And the question of which version he actually needs is one the picture leaves the audience to sit with. Whatever else The Machinist is doing, it is using these two women to map the loneliness at the center of its protagonist, and the loneliness is the part the twist cannot fix. Number 14. Post-its became evidence. A yellow square stuck on the fridge, another by the bathroom mirror, a third on the inside of a cabinet. The notes are small, ordinary, the kind of object that lives on every working person's kitchen wall. In Trevor's apartment, they are not reminders. They are a hangman puzzle being filled in one letter at a time, and they are being left there by someone who knows what he did. The hangman conceit works on the audience the way the apartment works on Trevor. Each new post-it adds a letter. Each new letter narrows the possibilities. The viewer starts solving the puzzle along with him, and the apartment slowly becomes a crime board before the crime has been named. The film never has to stop to explain that the notes are clues. The format does the explaining. The Hangman is a children's game built around guessing what has been hidden, and the choice to deliver the central reveal one paper square at a time turns the apartment itself into the prosecution. By the time the puzzle is complete, the audience has solved it before Trevor admits he has. The picture has not been hiding the answer. It has been writing it on the wall in small yellow steps, and the only character who has not been reading the wall is the man who lives there. That structural trick is the chapter's secret. The post-its are not props. They are confession, dressed as routine, waiting in the apartment for Trevor to catch up to himself. Number 15. The film cut its own excess. Editing on The Machinist trimmed material that did not earn its place in the final cut. The film as released is lean, claustrophobic, and locked to Trevor's point of view, and the cut that audiences saw was not the first cut the production assembled. Material that broadened scope, slowed pace, or eased the film's grip on its protagonist was removed during the editing process. What remained was the version that worked. There is sometimes a temptation, with films that have a strong final mood, to assume that earlier cuts were softer, more redemptive, more conventionally satisfying. The deleted material that survives from the project's edit doesn't support that reading. The cuts were the kind editors make in any tightly focused thriller, like pacing trims, redundant beats, scenes that diluted rather than deepened. The picture didn't sand down a kinder version of itself. It tightened the version it already had. That distinction matters because the film's grip on the viewer depends on its narrowness. If the cut had stayed broader, if more characters had been given more room, if Trevor's interior had been interrupted more often by the outside world, the suffocating quality the picture is now praised for would not have arrived in the same form. The editing process is not where the film became dark. The editing process is where the picture stayed dark by refusing the easier cuts that would have let the audience breathe. Number 16. Festivals found it first. In October 2004, The Machinist premiered at the Sitges Film Festival in Catalonia, the same coastal town where genre cinema had been gathering audiences since the late 1960s. The reception in Sitges marked the first sustained encounter the film had with viewers who weren't tied to its production, and it was the first time the project's commercial difficulty looked, briefly, like an advantage. Festival audiences responded to material that American financiers had spent years declining. The script that had been called too bleak and too slow was being praised as disciplined and patient. Bale's transformation drew immediate attention, and Xavi Giménez's cinematography was singled out for the bleached metallic palette that gave the film its specific texture. Critics and programmers who had not been part of the years-long search for financing found the picture serious in a way the market had refused to underwrite. That shift from rejection to recognition is the film's quiet pivot point. The studios that wouldn't make it were not the studios that decided what it was worth. The screenplay had survived rejection by traveling to Spain and finding Filmax. The finished film survived obscurity by traveling further, finding festival audiences who treated its difficulty as a strength. By the time the picture reached wider release in late 2004 and early 2005, the question of whether the project was viable had already been answered, just not by the people who originally turned it down. Number 17. Anderson's calling card. Before The Machinist, Brad Anderson was a director known mostly for smaller indie features like Next Stop Wonderland, Happy Accidents, and Session 9, films that drew critical attention without lodging permanently in the cultural memory. After The Machinist, he was something different. He was the director of the Bale film. The project became the title closest to his name in almost every conversation about his career, and it became the calling card he would carry into everything that followed. That positioning is unusual because the picture did not make Anderson a mainstream director. He did not move into studio tentpoles. He continued working in mid-budget genre territory on films like Trans-Siberian and The Call, and built a sustained television career across prestige and procedural episodes. The film that defined him commercially was not a film that pushed him upward into a different tier of cinema. It was a film that crystallized what he was already doing into a single, memorable title. A calling card is not the same as a launching pad. The injuries he carried through the shoot and the production he pulled together in Barcelona produced the work that became his identifier, and the identifier turned out to be enough. Almost 2 decades later, he is still introduced in profile after profile as the director of the Bale film. The shorthand has not faded. Number 18. Small release, big shadow. Roughly $8 million. That's the figure most often cited for The Machinist's worldwide box office, against a production budget reported in the same range and a marketing footprint that was modest by 2004 thriller standards. By commercial measures, the film had a quiet theatrical life. Paramount Classics handled the US release with a limited rollout. The title never expanded into wide commercial play, and the picture made its money slowly rather than in a single opening weekend. What changed the math was everything that happened after the theatrical run. Home video, late-night cable, DVD passing between friends, and eventually streaming carried the film into rooms that the box office had never reached. Reviews from the festival run lingered. Bale's transformation kept getting cited. The project's reputation expanded year over year, while its commercial release remained the same modest number it had always been. By the late 2000s and 10s, the film had become a reference point inside conversations about psychological thrillers, performance commitment, and bleak-look filmmaking, none of which the original box office line would have predicted. Number 19. The apartment closed in. Open the door. The fridge motor hums steady. The fluorescent strip in the bathroom buzzes faintly. The walls are a tired, undifferentiated color, somewhere between cream and gray. The fixtures look chosen for someone who is not coming back. Trevor's apartment is not the home of a man who lives there. It is the home of a man who is being held there. The production design carries most of the work. There is no clutter beyond the necessary. No photographs and frames, no accumulated personal objects except what the script requires. The fridge holds almost nothing. The bathroom is sterile. The bedroom is functional. Even before the hangman notes start appearing, The space reads as evidence rather than as residence, a room that has been prepared for a confession rather than a life. When the post-its begin to multiply across the surfaces, they do not disrupt the apartment so much as complete it. The yellow squares are the missing accusation the space had already been waiting to deliver. By the third act, the apartment has stopped being shelter. It has become the room where Trevor cannot keep what he did from catching up with him, and the design has been preparing that room since the first time the audience walked through the door. Number 20. Trevor became a cult figure. Cult status is not the kind of thing that usually attaches to a film as difficult to recommend as The Machinist. The picture is bleak, slow in stretches, visually punishing, and built around a protagonist whose physical state makes some viewers genuinely uncomfortable to watch. By the usual logic of cult cinema, things like repeatable, quotable, communal, fun, the film should have stayed an admired one-off. It didn't. The reason it didn't sits in how the film rewards repeat viewing. On a first watch, the audience is moving through the mystery alongside Trevor, picking up clues, working out the structure, watching the body language for tells. On a second watch, the structure is visible, and the experience flips entirely. The post-its are no longer puzzles. The hangman is no longer a hangman. The mother's apartment, the airport scene, Ivan, the photo on the wall, every detail that was disorienting the first time becomes a deliberate planted piece of information the second time. The film effectively contains two pictures, one for each kind of viewing, and the second is the one that creates the cult. That second viewing is also where Trevor stops being a figure of pity and starts being a figure of recognition. Viewers who return to the film return for the patterns, the way guilt builds an architecture, the way denial decorates it, the way the body wears it. The character has remained memorable not because he is fun, but because he is the cleanest filmic version of a particular kind of psychological state that audiences keep wanting to revisit. Most cult films keep an audience because they are easy to love. This one keeps its audience because it is hard to forget. Number 21. The twist wasn't the point. The reveal in The Machinist is that Trevor was responsible for a hit and run that killed a child, and that everything the audience has been watching, like the disappearing body, the unreliable workplace, the persecutory notes, the figure in the apartment, the structural failures of memory, has been the slow surfacing of that buried act. The reveal closes the plot. It does not close the film. What separates the picture from a standard twist thriller is that the answer is not the point. A film built around a twist tends to position the reveal as the achievement and the build-up as the puzzle. The audience solves the puzzle resolves, the film ends. The architecture here works differently. The twist is the moment Trevor finally admits, to himself and to the picture, what he has been refusing to admit since the first frame. The reveal is a confession, not a solution. The film is interested in what it takes for a person to arrive at that confession, and it is interested in what such an arrival costs. By the time Trevor turns himself in, the audience has been watching guilt take a body apart, sleep apart, mind apart. The skeletal frame, the broken routines, the imagined doubles, the half-remembered conversations, all of it has been the slow physicalization of something Trevor has been carrying alone. The picture does not present that carrying as bearable. It presents it as the thing Trevor was about to die from, and it suggests that the confession is the only release available to him. That framing turns the film into a moral picture rather than a mystery one. The viewer is not asked to admire how cleverly the truth was hidden. The viewer is asked to sit with the cost of hiding it. The final shot, with Trevor at last in a place where he can sleep, is not a triumph and not quite a relief either. It is a man arriving at the end of a process that began long before the camera turned on, and the film leaves the meaning of that arrival deliberately unsettled. The plot has its answer. The picture, on purpose, does not. What gives The Machinist its hold isn't the twist, but the texture, the bleached image, the theremin, the literary echoes, the post-its, the doubles, a man who can't sleep and can't escape what he did. Bale's transformation made the film famous, but the script that no one wanted, the city pretending to be nowhere, the score borrowed from 1951, the symbols hidden in plain sight, and that small final confession are what make it linger long after the credits. The film didn't open big, didn't sweep awards, and didn't dominate a season. It kept finding new viewers through reviews, home video, and word of mouth, year after year. If you found something in this list you hadn't seen before, leaving a like and subscribing helps more of this work get made. And down in the comments, let us know which clue or behind-the-scenes detail changed how you see the film, because that's where the second viewing really starts.